66 million years ago, a cosmic wound was inflicted upon our world, erasing the Titans in a single, devastating moment. The vast, slow symphony of the Mesozoic ended with a blinding flash and an endless, crushing winter. A world of giants collapsed, leaving behind a ghost planet shrouded in darkness. Yet, in that chilling aftermath, life did not cease. It whispered. It adapted. We often look to the age of dinosaurs for spectacle, but tonight, on Tierra Hueca, we journey to the true dawn of our world, the Cenozoic era. We trace the rise of a secret world, small and cautious, which inherited the empty throne. This is the story of recovery, reinvention, and seismic shifts in climate that forced life to climb from the burrows to the canopy. We will explore a world where continents drift to their modern positions, where mountains soar and where tiny survivors, your distant,
burrowing ancestors evolved into a breathtaking array of giants.
Prepare to drift into the quiet majesty of deep time, where the greatest story of evolution begins, step by step, toward us. We begin our journey precisely at the moment of rupture. 66 million years ago, the vibrant, sun-drenched Mesozoic world, a world of towering ferns and bellowing giants, vanished. The immediate aftermath was not a slow decline, but a cascade of unimaginable catastrophe initiated in a single, terrifying instant. Imagine for a moment the world in the split second after a 10-kilometer-wide asteroid slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact site was a shallow, sulfur-rich sea. The initial energy release was equivalent to millions of megatons of TNT detonating simultaneously. The ground itself buckled and fractured, sending seismic waves across the globe. Everything within hundreds of miles was vaporized instantly, but the true devastation was planetary. The impact pulverized colossal amounts of rock, ejecting a massive plume of dust, debris, and, critically, sulfate aerosols high into the stratosphere. This material did not simply fall back to Earth, it blanketed the entire globe. Within hours, a global phenomenon began, a horrifying, suffocating darkness. The first disaster was fire. A vast portion of the ejected material, superheated by friction as it re-entered the atmosphere, rained down across the planet as a storm of incandescent spherules. This global heat pulse was so intense that it ignited massive, widespread wildfires across every continent. The skies glowed red, and the air itself became a furnace. Creatures unable to find shelter underground or in the water were likely cooked alive in this thermal surge, but the fire was only the beginning of the collapse. As the debris and soot hung suspended in the atmosphere, the sky grew permanently opaque. This triggered the infamous impact winter. Sunlight, the engine of all life on Earth, was effectively shut off. Photosynthesis, the process that powers primary producers, the plants and phytoplankton, ceased almost entirely. In the oceans, phytoplankton, the base of the marine food web, died off almost immediately.
On land, the vast forests and flowering plants began to starve.
This biological shutdown caused the food chains to collapse from the bottom up. Large herbivores, which needed tremendous amounts of daily foliage, perished quickly. The carnivores and apex predators who relied on the large herbivores followed soon after. This is why 3/4 of all plant and animal species on Earth, including all non-avian dinosaurs and great marine reptiles like the mosasaurs, were erased. The planet plunged into a deep freeze. Global temperatures plummeted, and the cooling effect lasted for years, far beyond the initial heat pulse. So, who survived this unprecedented environmental collapse? The fossil record tells a clear story of selectivity. The survivors shared critical traits that offered a shield against the darkness and the cold. Small body size, anything over about 55 pounds, 25 kilos, largely vanished. Smaller creatures require less food and can reproduce faster, allowing them to ride out resource scarcity. semi-fossorial or aquatic habits. Those who could shelter underground, in burrows,
under logs or within crevices, escaped the initial heat pulse and the worst of the surface fires.
Animals living in streams and lakes were protected from the intense heat and the immediate devastation of the atmospheric fallout. Dietary flexibility. Strict herbivores and strict carnivores were the most vulnerable because their specialized food sources were gone. The great survivors were omnivores and insectivores, the generalists. These tiny mammals and birds could scavenge for detritus, eat dead organisms or subsist on roots, seeds, and buried insects which fed on the decaying plant matter. This dark, silent world, choked with soot and starving, became the incubator for the next great age. The inheritance of the small, the burrowing, and the flexible was not a throne of glory, but a desolate world of darkness and cold. It was from this apocalyptic blank slate that our distant mammalian ancestors, no bigger than rats and shrews, emerged to claim their unexpected destiny. The age of the great reptiles had ended, and the age of mammals had quietly begun. In the blackness of the impact winter, the very foundation of Earth's life had been utterly destroyed. But the Paleocene epoch, the first 10 million years of the Cenozoic era, is the story of a shattered world learning to breathe again. This recovery was not a moment, but a long, slow dawn where opportunism became the greatest evolutionary advantage. The first sign of hope emerged in the plant kingdom, recorded in the fossilized pollen and spores. Immediately following the catastrophe, the global floral record reveals a phenomenon known as the fern spike. Ferns, highly resilient spore-bearing plants, were the first colonizers of the desolate, fire-scorched landscapes. Their hardy nature allowed them to survive the harsh environment and rapidly spread their spores across the empty, sunlit ground that was once dense forest canopy. The world was temporarily dominated by vast, low-lying mats of ferns, a stark visual contrast to the towering plant life of the Cretaceous. This initial, simple plant recovery slowly stabilized the soil, began the process of drawing carbon from the atmosphere, and provided the first meager resources for the animal survivors. It took millennia, but the more complex flowering plants, angiosperms, which had been heavily impacted by the darkness, gradually returned, leading to a new type of forest, one that was dense and sprawling, but initially low in species richness. With the re-establishment of a primary food source, the surviving fauna, those small, nocturnal, and highly adaptable mammals, began their evolutionary ascent. For 160 million years, mammals had lived literally in the shadow of the dinosaurs. Their small size was a necessary defense, their nocturnal lifestyle an adaptation to avoid the Archosaurian rulers of the day. Now that pressure was violently and completely removed. The ecological niches were vast and empty. The immediate mammalian response was a dramatic, adaptive radiation. Within the first few 100,000 years of the Paleocene, the number of mammalian genera began to explode. This burst of evolution was faster and more prolific than at any previous time in mammalian history. Our ancestors, which had all been small, generalized insectivores or omnivores, now began experimenting with size, shape, and diet. The shift in dominance was irrevocable. Reptilian giants vanish. The ecological space for large, cold-blooded reptiles was gone. The climate was simply too volatile and the food chain too unreliable for creatures that required massive daily intake and external heat to function. The surviving reptiles, such as turtles and crocodilians, were mostly detritus feeders or aquatic dwellers, proving their adaptability. Mammals take the throne. Mammals, with their warm-blooded metabolism, endothermy, and insulating fur, were perfectly equipped to handle the cooler temperatures and the nutritional uncertainty. Their endothermy meant they could remain active in the lingering cold, allowing them to outcompete any remaining large, cold-blooded life. The most noticeable early change was a rapid increase in body size. The tiny mammals, originally mouse or rat-sized, around 0.5 kilograms, began pushing the boundaries of size. This was the first major step in the Cenozoic, demonstrating that the biological limits imposed by the dinosaurs were truly broken. The Paleocene saw the emergence of animals that could grow to the size of small bears or tapirs, the first of the great Paleogene giants. Crucially, this recovery was driven by the newly available plant resources. As the flora recovered, specialized herbivores emerged, marked by evolving teeth and jaws designed to process tougher vegetation. The Paleocene was a testing ground for life, a chaotic period of trial and error, where many lineages experimented with new forms and died out. But the successful few laid the foundation for virtually every modern group of mammal we know today, including the very first primitive primates and the ancestors of horses and rhinos. The world was no longer silent. The quiet whisper of the burrows was growing into a steady, evolutionary roar. The Paleocene epoch was defined by the removal of a biological ceiling. For millions of years, the largest mammals lived in a state of arrested development, their size capped by the risk of meeting a carnivorous dinosaur. Once the non-avian giants were gone, the pressure was off, and evolution's most persistent rule, that some lineages will always trend toward larger size, took hold. The result was the spontaneous, rapid emergence of the archaic megafauna. These first mammalian titans were strange creatures, evolutionary experiments that arose quickly to fill the vacant mega-herbivore and large omnivore niches. They belong to groups that have no direct modern descendants, a testament to the chaotic and creative energy of life's recovery. They represented the Paleocene's answer to the need for bulk and power, and they achieved sizes unprecedented in the history of mammals up to that point. One of the most enduring and important of these early giants was Coryphodon, size and presence. Appearing in the late Paleocene and flourishing into the early Eocene, Coryphodon was among the largest mammals of its time, weighing up to half a ton, around 500 kilograms, and standing about a meter tall at the shoulder. Though small by later Cenozoic standards, this was a massive leap from the tiny, shrew-like mammals that survived the KPG boundary. It was a true biogeographical success, with species ranging across North America, Europe, and Asia. Ecological niche. Coryphodon and its relatives, the pantodonts, were heavy-bodied browsers. Their skeletal structure and broad five-toed feet suggest a semi-aquatic lifestyle, much like the modern hippopotamus. They thrived in the warm, swampy forests that characterized much of the Paleocene world, using their stout bodies and powerful necks to uproot and process aquatic and marsh vegetation. Adaptations of a pioneer. Coryphodon was built for brute strength, not speed or intelligence. Notably, it possessed one of the lowest brain-to-body mass ratios of any known mammal, a reminder that in this early stage of recovery, simply having the bulk to dominate the landscape was enough. Males displayed prominent canine tusks, likely used in intraspecies competition or for rooting up tough plants. Alongside Coryphodon, other lineages also quickly pushed the limits of mammalian size. The pantodonts included another significant Paleocene giant, Titanoides' appearance and niche. Titanoides was a massive, bear-like creature up to 3 meters (9.8 feet) long and weighing around 150 kilograms, making it the largest mammal in its particular North American swampland habitats. Despite its fierce appearance, complete with large claws on its five-toed feet and huge canine tusks, Titanoides was primarily a specialized herbivore. Survival strategy, its powerful claws and tusk-like canines were likely adaptations for digging up roots, tubers, and tough ground vegetation, a critical resource in the immediate post-extinction world where canopy-level food was sparse. Its large size was its best defense against the primitive predators of the time, mainly large crocodiles. These early giants like Coryphodon and Titanoides were not related to the megafauna that would later evolve in the Cenozoic, like elephants or rhinos. They were evolutionary placeholders, ancient, generalized body plans that rushed to exploit the power vacuum. Their significance lies in two key areas. Ecosystem engineering. By becoming large herbivores, they fundamentally changed the environment. Their feeding habits prevented the forests from becoming uniformly dense, created pathways and recycled nutrients through the soil, establishing the first major cycles of resource distribution in the new era. They became the ecosystem architects, setting the stage for modernity. Their success demonstrated to succeeding lineages that immense size was once again a viable evolutionary path. They proved that the energy flow of the post-impact world could sustain massive life. While these archaic orders would largely die out later in the Paleogene, replaced by the ancestors of modern groups, they provided the critical first step, passing the torch of megasize from the reptiles to the mammals. The age of the tiny survivors was over. The age of mammals had dawned, and its first, somewhat clumsy, titans had begun to walk the Earth just 10 million years into the Cenozoic era. As life was finally settling into the new, post-dinosaur rhythms, Earth suffered another dramatic, abrupt climatic shock, a fever spike known as the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, or PETM. This was not a catastrophe on the scale of the asteroid impact, but it was a period of intense, rapid global warming that dramatically reshaped the evolutionary trajectory of the planet. The PETM occurred approximately 56
million years ago and represents one of the most significant and sudden
global warming events in the geological record. Its core mechanism was the massive and rapid release of carbon in the form of carbon dioxide and potentially methane into the atmosphere and oceans. The exact trigger remains a subject of scientific debate, but the most likely suspects involve deep Earth processes, methane clathrates. The leading hypothesis suggests extensive volcanism, possibly related to the formation of the North Atlantic, warmed the deep oceans enough to destabilize vast frozen reserves of methane hydrates, clathrates, stored in seafloor sediments. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. Its release created a runaway warming effect. Volcanic activity, massive eruptions, such as those that formed the North Atlantic Igneous Province, NAIP, directly injected huge amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere, triggering the initial warmth needed to melt the methane. The release of carbon was enormous, estimated to be thousands of petagrams, and while it took thousands of years, perhaps 4,000 to 20,000 years, this was geologically instantaneous. This influx of greenhouse gases caused global average temperatures to soar by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, 9 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. The effect of this fever dream on the planet was profound. Global tropics' high-latitude regions became subtropical. Fossil evidence indicates that warm weather species, including crocodiles, lived north of the Arctic Circle, and palm trees flourished in places like Alaska. The Arctic Ocean's surface water may have warmed to a balmy 23°C, 73°F. Ocean acidification. As the oceans absorbed vast amounts of CO2, the water's pH plummeted, a phenomenon known as ocean acidification. This was devastating for marine life that builds shells and skeletons from calcium carbonate, such as plankton and deep-sea organisms. This caused a major extinction event among benthic foraminifera, microscopic organisms living on the seafloor, which suffered extinction rates of 30 to 50%. Hydrological shift. The extreme heat led to intense changes in global weather patterns, resulting in increased evaporation, more severe storms, and massive regional droughts and flooding. On land, the PETM was less an extinction event and more a massive agent of evolutionary change, driving dispersal and speciation. The Northern Rush. the extreme warmth melted northern ice, creating temporary land bridges between continents, North America, Europe, and Asia, at high latitudes. This allowed for an unprecedented, rapid intercontinental migration of mammals. This is the moment when many modern mammalian orders, including the ancestors of primates like early Cantius, artiodactyls, even-toed ungulates like early deer, and perissodactyls, odd-toed ungulates like early horses, suddenly appeared in the North American and European fossil records, arriving from Asia. The dwarfing effect. In one of the PETM's most fascinating biological responses, many mammalian lineages that survived the warming event shrank dramatically. This phenomenon, known as evolutionary dwarfing, saw creatures like the ancestor of the horse, Hyracotherium, shrink by up to 30%. This reduction in size is believed to be an adaptation. To the heat, a smaller body dissipates heat more efficiently, and to the lower nutritional quality, the plants grown quickly under high CO2 conditions, the PETM acted as a pressure cooker, injecting a new wave of modern mammalian life into the northern continents and accelerating evolutionary changes. While the entire fever dream lasted only about 100,000 to 200,000 years, the vast amounts of carbon released provide scientists today with the closest natural analog we have to understanding the long-term, dramatic consequences of rapid human-driven climate change. Following the intense, but relatively brief, shock of the PETM, the climate did not immediately cool. Instead, the subsequent Eocene epoch, lasting from about 56 to 33.9 million years ago, stabilized into the single warmest period of the entire Cenozoic era, a true hothouse Earth. This epoch offers a vision of a planet fundamentally different from our own, defined by the near-total absence of polar ice. The defining characteristic of the Eocene world was the lack of permanent continental ice sheets, even in Antarctica. No glaciers. Without vast ice sheets at the poles, global sea levels were significantly higher than they are today. The geography was largely stable, but the climate had no frozen breaks to regulate heat. The flat thermal gradient. The incredible warmth was not evenly distributed. Rather, the temperature difference between the equator and the poles was drastically smaller than it is today. While the tropics likely experienced similar high temperatures to the modern day, the high latitude regions were shockingly warm, often reaching average annual temperatures 25 C, 45 Abdullah, warmer than the present. This extreme, uniform global warmth led to a paradoxical sight that is difficult to reconcile with the modern world. Tropical and paratropical forests growing at the edges of the Earth, Arctic oases. In what is now the frigid Canadian Arctic, such as Ellesmere Island, fossil evidence reveals vast, lush forests dominated by deciduous trees like the dawn redwood, metasequoia, and swamp cypress. Even more astonishingly, fossils of palm trees and warm-weather reptiles like alligators and turtles have been discovered in these regions, confirming that the winters were essentially frost-free. Antarctica's jungle, even the coastal regions of Antarctica, at a paleolatitude of approximately 70 south, supported incredibly diverse near-tropical forests. Palynological evidence, fossil pollen, indicates the presence of palms and other megathermal flora, requiring mild winters with mean temperatures warmer than 10 C, 50 Abdullah, even during periods of polar darkness. The Antarctic continent was a verdant, dynamic landmass, a far cry from the ice-covered desert we know. This Eocene hothouse climate had profound implications for life and evolution. Mammalian dispersal. The warm, forested conditions at high latitudes created Arctic land bridges like the Beringia and North Atlantic routes that were hospitable year-round. These corridors facilitated the continued rapid intercontinental exchange of the modern mammalian orders, which had exploded in diversity following the PETM. The rise of modern groups. The Eocene is often referred to as the dawn of modern life. In this moist, forested world, new forms rapidly diversified. The earliest ancestors of bats, rodents, primates, and carnivores, like the ancestral dogs and cats, all emerged. Critically, it also saw the development of the two fully marine mammal groups that exist today: cetaceans, whales, and sirenians, manatees and dugongs. The Eocene was a unique climate equilibrium driven by high atmospheric CO2 levels. It represents a critical chapter of the Cenozoic, a peak of warmth and global connectivity that would eventually be replaced by the slow, inexorable cooling trend that would lead to the world we inhabit today. The era of the polar forests was fleeting, but its influence on the distribution and evolution of modern life was permanent. The Eocene was an age of biological innovation, but few transformations are as complete, rapid, and dramatic as the story of the cetaceans, the whales, dolphins, and porpoises. This is not the story of life leaving the ocean, but of land mammals related to hoofed grazing animals, making an astonishing return to the ancient sea. This profound evolutionary journey, documented by a spectacular series of transitional fossils from the shallow seas that once covered what is now Pakistan and Egypt, began roughly 50 million years ago with creatures like Pachycetus. The land ancestor, Pachycetus. The oldest known cetacean was a wolf-sized mammal living in the early Eocene. It was a hoofed animal, biologically linked to artiodactyls, even toed ungulates, making its closest living relative today the hippopotamus. Crucially, its inner ear structure, the specific morphology of the involucrum and tympanic bulla, was the first unmistakable sign of the whale lineage, even though the animal itself was still terrestrial, likely wading in freshwater streams to hunt. The walking whale, Ambulocetus. The next critical step was the appearance of Ambulocetus, the walking whale. This creature, which lived around 47 million years ago, was truly amphibious. It possessed large feet that may have been webbed, strong hind legs capable of supporting its weight on land, albeit clumsily, and a body adapted for undulatory swimming, similar to an otter or a crocodile. Its fossils were found in near-shore marine deposits, confirming the move to saltwater estuaries. The final stage of the Eocene transition is epitomized by Basilosaurus, which translates, misleadingly, to king lizard. When first discovered in the 1830s, its massive, elongated vertebrae led researchers to mistakenly classify it as a sea-going reptile. Fully aquatic adaptation. Living in the late Eocene, around 41 to 34 million years ago, Basilosaurus was the first whale fully committed to the marine environment. It was streamlined, lacking any bony connection between its pelvis and spine, meaning it could no longer support its weight on land. Its forelimbs were reduced to flippers used primarily for steering. The serpentine body. The most striking feature of Basilosaurus was its extraordinary length, up to 18 meters, 60 feet long, and its serpentine, eel-like body. Unlike modern whales, which use powerful up and down thrusts of their tails, flukes, for propulsion, Basilosaurus likely moved by undulating its entire, highly flexible spine, giving it a graceful, wavy movement, vestigial legs. In a stunning illustration of its land heritage, Basilosaurus still possessed tiny vestigial hind legs. These legs were too small to be used for locomotion, but they were not entirely useless. It's hypothesized they were retained as grasping organs used during mating, a small but powerful echo of its terrestrial past. An Eocene apex predator, with a crocodile-like snout and a fearsome array of teeth, conical for grasping in the front, and multi-cusped, serrated molars for shearing in the back, Basilosaurus was the apex predator of the Eocene oceans, preying on large fish and even smaller, more dolphin-like whales like Dorudon. The evolution from a small land mammal that occasionally waded to the fully serpentine globe-trotting Basilosaurus in just 16 million years showcases the incredible speed and power of Cenozoic evolution, when massive ecological niches like the global ocean are suddenly opened. This king lizard was the final critical waypoint before the lineage split into the two modern suborders, the great baleen whales and the intelligent toothed whales. The story of the horse is perhaps the most iconic and complete tale of Cenozoic evolution, a perfectly preserved narrative of adaptation driven by the shift from dense forest to open grassland. This great transformation begins not with a magnificent stallion, but with a tiny, multi-toed woodland dweller, often called Eohippus,
Or the dawn horse, the earliest known horse ancestor.
formerly classified as belonging to the genus Hyracotherium, but widely known by its more poetic name. Eohippus appeared approximately 55 million years ago during the warm, forested Eocene epoch. Size and habitat. This creature was tiny, about the size of a fox or a small dog, standing only 30 to 60 centimeters, 1 to 2 feet, tall at the shoulder. It was adapted for life in the dense, humid forests that covered much of North America and Europe. The multi-toed foot, Eohippus, looked nothing like a modern horse. Its most telling feature was its foot structure, an evolutionary blueprint for its environment. It had 4 functional toes on its front feet and 3 functional toes on its hind feet. Each toe ended in a small, distinct proto-hoof, and the foot rested on a padded sole, much like a dog's paw. This multi-toed arrangement was perfect for distributing weight across the soft, uneven, and moist forest floor, providing traction and maneuverability in thick underbrush. Diet and dentition. Its teeth were low-crowned, brachydont, with dull, bumpy surfaces, perfect for a browser that fed on soft leaves, fruit, and succulent shoots, but useless for grinding tough grasses. As the Cenozoic progressed, global climate began its long cooling and drying trend. By the Miocene epoch, around 23 million years ago, the vast continental interior forests began to shrink and were replaced by wide, open grasslands, steppes. This enormous environmental shift was the engine that drove the horse lineage, known as Equidae, through a great transformation, characterized by 3 concurrent evolutionary trends: increase in size and speed. Moving from forest concealment to open plains left horses vulnerable to increasingly specialized predators. Selection favored greater size and elongated limbs, cursorial adaptation, to achieve the speed necessary to flee across open ground. Adaptation to grazing. Grasses contain microscopic silica particles, phytoliths, that are highly abrasive. As the horse diet shifted from soft leaves to tough grass, natural selection favored the development of high-crowned teeth, hypsodonti. These complex, deep-rooted molars allowed for side-to-side grinding and provided a continuous grinding surface as the crowns were worn down throughout the animal's life. Reduction of digits to a single hoof, monodactyly. The cushioned, multi-toed foot of the forest floor was inefficient on the hard, open plains. Over millions of years, the side toes, digits 2 and 4, gradually reduced in size until they became non-functional or were retained only as small splint bones fused to the main bone. The central toe, digit 3, became enlarged, hardened, and encased in the massive single hoof. This adaptation transformed the foot into a spring-loaded pogo stick, providing maximum stability and energy efficiency for traveling long distances across hard terrain, an adaptation critical for a grazing animal roaming widely in search of food. Fossils like Mesohippus, Oligocene, 3-toed browser, and Merychippus, Miocene, 3-toed high-crowned grazer, chart this intricate, branching path of adaptation which ultimately culminated in the modern single-toed genus Equus. The hoof is therefore a profound symbol of the Cenozoic era, a specialized biomechanical marvel that reflects the planet's transition from a lush, humid greenhouse to a drier, more open world. The relative warmth and continuity of the Eocene, which had fueled spectacular mammalian diversification, could not last forever. The Cenozoic era is fundamentally defined by a dramatic and sustained global cooling trend, and the first major, unmistakable shift toward this cooler world is recorded in a paleontological event known as the Grand Coupure, or the Great Break, occurring roughly 33.9 million years ago, marking the boundary between the Eocene and the Oligocene epochs. The Grand Coupure was primarily a response to a pivotal moment in plate tectonics, the opening of the Drake Passage, Antarctica's isolation. As the supercontinent Gondwana finally finished its fragmentation, the land bridge connecting South America and Antarctica rifted apart. This event created a vast, deep water channel, the Drake Passage, which allowed the circumantarctic current to form for the first time, the global refrigerator. This powerful, unimpeded oceanic current began to circle Antarctica, isolating the continent both oceanically and climatically. It prevented warmer equatorial waters from reaching Antarctica, creating a massive thermal barrier. The immediate and profound result was the sudden and permanent formation of the first major Antarctic ice sheet. This transition from a world with little or no ice, the greenhouse world, to a world with permanent ice, the icehouse world, fundamentally shifted global climate. Temperatures plummeted worldwide, replacing the subtropical forests of the Eocene with drier, more seasonal climates. The Grand Coupure is best documented in Europe, where the paleontological record shows an abrupt and devastating faunal turnover, mass extinction and replacement. Within a geologically brief period of time, perhaps less than 200,000 years, much of Europe's endemic archaic mammalian fauna was wiped out. Species such as primitive primates, adapiforms, and unique European ungulates were replaced almost entirely by a new suite of mammals that had rapidly migrated from Asia. The Asian invasion. The cause of this rapid replacement was likely not just the colder climate, but the establishment of temporary land connections between Asia and Europe, which allowed these new, more resilient animals to displace the local inhabitants. These incoming Asian immigrants included ancestors of the modern rhinos, artiodactyls, even-toed ungulates, and rodents, which were far better adapted to the newly dry, open, and seasonally cool landscapes that were replacing the continuous Eocene forests. A paleontological chasm. The break in the fossil record is so complete and sudden that 19th century paleontologists viewed it as a genuine cut, or rupture in the history of life, hence the name. It dramatically reset the evolutionary clock in Europe, eliminating the archaic Paleogene lineages and setting the stage for the diversification of mammal groups recognizable today. Beyond Europe, the Grand Coupure signaled the rise of seasonality and aridity globally. Forests retreat. As the earth cooled and dried, the dense, continuous forests retreated toward the equator. This allowed open woodlands and savanna-like environments to expand across the continental interiors. This landscape transformation would become the primary driving force for evolution throughout the Oligocene, favoring faster, more cursorial, running mammals built for life on the open plains. The end of archaic mammals. The archaic megafauna that had thrived in the Eocene warmth and forest density, such as the large pantodonts and some of the primitive predator lineages, found themselves poorly equipped for the new, open, and resource-scarce environments. They were quickly outcompeted by the new, faster, and more specialized immigrants who possessed modern anatomical blueprints. The Grand Coupure was a stark reminder that the age of mammals would be defined not by steady growth, but by dramatic, climate-driven crises. It was the moment the Cenozoic world truly began its march towards the colder, more volatile conditions that would eventually culminate in the Ice Ages. The Grande Coupure marked a decisive fracture between the old Cenozoic world and the new. Its long-term consequence was the Oligocene freeze, the stabilization of Earth into an icehouse climate state, a condition defined by the presence of permanent ice at the poles, a state that persists with fluctuations to this very day. This was a sustained global trend that fundamentally dried and hardened the planet. The critical event driving the Oligocene freeze was the opening of the Drake Passage and the Tasmanian Seaway, which occurred near the Eocene-Oligocene transition around 34 million years ago. These tectonic shifts allowed the immense circumantarctic current, ACC, to form, flowing freely around the bottom of the world. Global refrigerator. The ACC acted as a thermal shield, diverting warm equatorial waters away from the Antarctic continent and isolating it climatically. Without the influx of heat, the vast forested landmass of Antarctica rapidly plunged below freezing, leading to the dramatic and irreversible formation of the East Antarctic ice sheet. This continental-scale glaciation lowered sea levels worldwide by dozens of meters. The climate signal. This event is one of the most clearly recorded in the deep-sea sediment cores, particularly through the dramatic shift in oxygen isotopes, D18O, found in the shells of tiny marine organisms known as foraminifera. This isotopic spike signals two things simultaneously: significant deep-sea cooling and the lockup of isotopically light water in the growing continental ice. The cooling was not confined to the poles. It dramatically reorganized ecosystems globally. High-latitude regions that had supported subtropical forests in the Eocene cooled by an average of about 5°C, 9°F, leading to the following terrestrial shifts. Rise of seasonality. The most profound change was the introduction of pronounced seasons, particularly colder, drier winters. The continuous equable climate of the Eocene was gone, replaced by a climate that required specialized adaptation for survival through lean, cold months, aridification, and grassland. Expansion. As global temperatures dropped and aridity increased, the vast, continuous tropical and subtropical forests retreated toward the equator. This retreat opened up continental interiors, leading to the widespread expansion of open plains and scrublands. While C4 grasses, the tough, heat-resistant grasses that dominate modern savannas, would not fully dominate until the Miocene, the Oligocene saw the massive proliferation of other grass and herb species. Evolution of the runner. This new landscape favored speed and efficiency. The Oligocene became the age of the cursorial, running mammal. Creatures that could travel widely, chew tough vegetation, and outrun predators in the open were highly favored. This environmental pressure drove the rapid evolution of the ancestors of deer, camels, rhinos, and most famously, the horses, all of whom became taller, leggier, and better equipped for life on the increasingly exposed plains. The Oligocene freeze fundamentally reset the balance of life. It replaced the gentle, sprawling giants of the Paleogene with the leaner, faster, and more specialized lineages that would define the rest of the age of mammals. It was the moment the world first experienced the cyclical rhythm of cold and dry conditions that would culminate, much later, in the grand ice ages. As the Oligocene freeze set in and the globe cooled, the mammalian tendency toward gigantism reached its absolute terrestrial peak, a phenomenon embodied by the genus Paraceratherium, more popularly known by its historic, mythological-sounding name Indracotherium. This magnificent creature, a distant hornless relative of the modern rhinoceros, holds the undisputed title of the largest land mammal to ever walk the Earth. Paraceratherium dominated the wooded plains and open forests across vast stretches of Central Asia and Eurasia for millions of years. thriving in the newly established seasonal climates of the Oligocene, say 34 to 23 million years ago. Unrivaled scale. Imagine a living creature that makes an African elephant look small. The largest specimens of Paraceratherium stood about 4.8 to 5.5 meters, 16 to 18 feet, tall at the shoulder, with a total body length that could stretch up to 8 meters, 26 feet. Conservative weight estimates place this behemoth at 15 to 20 metric tons, often exceeding 4 times the mass of the modern African elephant. Its presence in the Oligocene landscape was unparalleled, a final, towering echo of the great bulk of the sauropod dinosaurs that reigned so long ago. The pillar-like anatomy. This colossal weight demanded a specialized anatomy. Paraceratherium evolved long, slender, and absolutely pillar-like legs built to support its tremendous mass. Unlike modern rhinos, its legs were long and straight, structured like columns to bear the load, granting it a long stride for efficient locomotion across the spreading Asian steppes. Despite its immense size and relationship to rhinos, Paraceratherium evolved to fill a feeding niche entirely unique to the Oligocene, the high canopy browser. A giraffe-like neck. The giant possessed a surprisingly long neck for a rhinoceros relative, allowing it to reach foliage up to 6 meters, 20 feet, off the ground, an elevation no other Oligocene herbivore could access. Specialized feeding. It lacked the iconic horn of its descendants, but it compensated with large tusk-like incisors and a strong, prehensile upper lip, or proboscis, small, flexible trunk. These features were used to strip leaves, shoots, and soft foliage from the highest branches. Its massive, low-crowned cheek teeth were perfectly suited for grinding this soft browse, contrasting sharply with the high-crowned teeth that grazing mammals were developing to eat abrasive grasses. Ecological dominance. Its sheer scale meant that adult Paraceratherium had virtually no natural predators. This allowed it to browse selectively and maintain a slow reproductive cycle, typical of megafauna. By specializing in the canopy, it avoided direct competition with the multitude of smaller mammals evolving below. The reign of the giant hornless rhino was ultimately brought to an end by the very forces that defined the Oligocene, cooling and aridification. As the global climate continued its cooling trend, the lush, wooded plains and forests of Central Asia gradually gave way to more extensive, drier steppes and open grasslands. Habitat loss. The continuous supply of soft, high foliage that Paraceratherium relied upon began to fragment and disappear. Its massive body size, once its greatest defense, became a liability, requiring huge amounts of food that were simply no longer readily available across its vast range. Competition. Simultaneously, faster, more advanced, and smaller competitors, the true rhinos and proboscideans, ancestors of elephants, were evolving. These new forms were either better adapted for eating the newly prevalent grasses or had more flexible diets. Paraceratherium vanished from the fossil record by the early Miocene, an astonishing spectacle that proved the mammalian body plan was capable of achieving terrestrial bulk, rivaling the greatest dinosaurs. But its extinction proved a fundamental truth. In the dynamic, cooling Cenozoic world, specialized size alone was no guarantee of survival. Following the Oligocene transition, the Miocene epoch, 23 to 5.3 million years ago, settled into the Cenozoic's longest phase of sustained cooling and drying. This slow, unidirectional climate shift was the single greatest driver of terrestrial evolution, profoundly altering landscapes and setting in motion a massive co-evolutionary struggle between plants and animals, the global rise of the grasslands. While grasslands first appeared in the Oligocene, The Miocene witnessed their true dominance and spread across nearly 40% of the Earth's landmass, fundamentally displacing the retreating forest. This expansion was driven by several interlocking factors. Continued cooling and drying. The cooler atmosphere held less moisture, leading to overall aridification, particularly in the continental interiors. This favored plants that could cope with low rainfall and seasonal drought. Declining CO2. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, which had been high in the Eocene, continued their long-term decline. This drop favored a specialized group of plants known as C4 grasses. The C4 advantage, C. 4 photosynthesis is a complex biochemical pathway that makes plants incredibly efficient under conditions of high heat, intense light, and low CO2. While C4 grasses originated much earlier, they only rose to ecological dominance globally during the late Miocene, starting around 8 million years ago. This was a green revolution that transformed tropical and subtropical landscapes, particularly in Africa and the Americas, into the vast, productive savannas we recognize today. The proliferation of open grasslands presented both a challenge and an opportunity to mammals, demanding radical new evolutionary blueprints for survival in these exposed, food-scarce environments. Teeth. The battle against grit. The grass diet was intensely abrasive for 2 reasons. Phytoliths. Grasses contain microscopic silica particles that wear down teeth. Grit and dust. Since grasses grow close to the ground, grazing meant that animals continuously ingested airborne dust and gritty soil. In response, herbivores across multiple, unrelated lineages evolved hypsodonty, the development of high-crowned, ever-growing molar teeth. Animals that failed to develop these deep-rooted, complex grinding surfaces saw their teeth wear out, leading to starvation. This dental arms race gave rise to new forms of horses, camels, antelopes, and giant sloths. Locomotion. Built for speed and travel. Life on the open savanna meant 2 things. There was no place to hide, and food and water required long-distance travel. Ungulates responded by developing cursorial, running adaptations, long, slender limbs, and a reduction in the number of toes. The horse's multi-toed foot was refined into the single, energy-efficient hoof, while antelope and deer developed the highly mobile joints needed for sustained, long-distance roaming. The shift in prey forced a corresponding change in predators, although their adaptation was primarily morphological, not dietary, blade-like molars. As the herbivore prey evolved to be faster and larger, the predators were selected for efficiency in taking them down and consuming them quickly. Fossil evidence shows that the molars of predators began to evolve toward a more blade-like shearing morphology. These teeth were optimized for cutting meat and crushing bone, a crucial adaptation for maximizing the energy return from large kills. The pursuit hunter. Predators such as the ancestors of modern dogs and cats, including the famed saber-toothed cats, evolved longer legs and a more lightweight, agile frame suitable for running down prey across the open plains, shifting the dominant predatory style from ambush hunting in the forests to pursuit hunting in the open. The Miocene grasslands expansion was more than just a biome shift. It was a fundamental reorganization of the food web, leading to a vibrant, recognizable diversity of specialized grazing mammals that would continue to evolve and spread into the next epoch. While the plains were being conquered by hoofed grazers, another crucial drama was unfolding in the shrinking forests of the Cenozoic, the evolution and global dispersal of the hominoidea, the superfamily that includes all apes.
And ultimately, us. The story of the apes begins in the warm,
humid forests of Africa during the early Miocene, around 23 to 16 million years ago. Unlike the sprawling archaic mammals that dominated the Oligocene, these earliest apes were initially small and diverse. A group that included the genus proconsul. This genus represents a critical evolutionary juncture. Proconsul had a mosaic of features. It lacked a tail, an ape trait, but its body had a long, flexible back and limbs of equal length, suggesting a monkey-like quadrupedal movement atop the tree branches,
rather than the swinging and hanging typical of modern great apes.
It marked the definitive split between the Old World monkeys and the apes. The island continent. For the earliest part of the Miocene, Africa was effectively an island continent, allowing these primitive ape forms to diversify unchallenged within their lush, stable forest habitats. Around 17 to 16 million years ago, a pivotal tectonic event changed the course of primate evolution, the collision of the Afro-Arabian plate with Eurasia. This event formed a land bridge, creating the first major dispersal route for African fauna, including the apes, into the vast expanse of Eurasia. Flourishing in the north. In Eurasia, the apes found a wealth of new, warm, subtropical forests and a comparative lack of competition. What followed was a spectacular radiation known as the Eurasian ape radiation. Genera like Dryopithecus in Europe and Saber-Pithecus in Asia flourished, with over 50 genera of fossil apes identified during the Miocene, a far greater diversity than the handful of ape genera alive today. New adaptations. These Eurasian apes experimented with new forms and adaptations, evolving thick enamel on their teeth to chew tougher, hard-shelled foods, and developing skeletal features that hinted at the specialized shoulder and arm joints seen in modern great apes. The fate of these widespread Miocene apes was ultimately tied to the cooling and drying trend, discussed in the previous chapter, climate collapse. As the late Miocene, starting around 10 million years ago, brought increased seasonality and widespread grassland expansion, the dense forests that the Eurasian apes relied on began to contract. Most of the European and Asian ape lineages ultimately went extinct in the face of this climatic squeeze, leaving only the ancestors of the orangutans in Asia and the ancestors of the gorillas and chimpanzees confined to the shrinking forests of Africa. The hominin divide. This environmental pressure in Africa, particularly in the Rift Valley region where forests fractured into patchy woodlands, is believed to have been the catalyst for the single most important divergence in this lineage, the split between the ancestors of chimpanzees and the ancestors of humans, hominins. Molecular clock and fossil evidence suggest this final, defining split occurred toward the end of the Miocene, between roughly 9 and 6 million years ago. The Miocene thus reveals a paradoxical truth. The apes were once a globally diverse, dominant group, but it was the contraction of the Miocene hothouse that eliminated most lineages, leaving only a few survivors, one of which, forced by changing vegetation and the need to cross open ground, would eventually develop the capacity for sustained bipedalism, setting our own story in motion. While the plains were being conquered by hoofed grazers, another crucial drama was unfolding in the shrinking forests of the Cenozoic, the evolution and global dispersal of the Hominoidea, the superfamily that includes all apes, and ultimately us. The story of the apes begins in the warm, humid forests of Africa during the early Miocene, around 23 to 16 million years ago. Unlike the sprawling archaic mammals that dominated the Oligocene, these earliest apes were initially small and diverse, a group that included the genus Proconsul. This genus represents a critical evolutionary juncture. Proconsul had a mosaic of features. It lacked a tail, an ape trait, but its body had a long, flexible back and limbs of equal length, suggesting a monkey-like quadrupedal movement atop the tree branches, rather than the swinging and hanging typical of modern great apes. It marked the definitive split between the Old World monkeys and the apes. The island continent. For the earliest part of the Miocene, Africa was effectively an island continent, allowing these primitive ape forms to diversify unchallenged within their lush, stable forest habitats around 17 to 16 million years ago. A pivotal tectonic event changed the course of primate evolution, the collision of the Afro-Arabian plate with Eurasia. This event formed a land bridge, creating the first major dispersal route for African fauna, including the apes, into the vast expanse of Eurasia, flourishing in the north. In Eurasia, the apes found a wealth of new, warm subtropical forests and a comparative lack of competition. What followed was a spectacular radiation known as the Eurasian ape radiation. Genera like Dryopithecus in Europe and Sivapithecus in Asia flourished, with over 50 genera of fossil apes identified during the Miocene, a far greater diversity than the handful of ape genera alive today. New adaptations. These Eurasian apes experimented with new forms and adaptations, evolving thick enamel on their teeth to chew tougher, hard-shelled foods, and developing skeletal features that hinted at the specialized shoulder and arm joints seen in modern great apes. The fate of these widespread Miocene apes was ultimately tied to the cooling and drying trend discussed in the previous chapter, climate collapse. As the late Miocene, starting around 10 million years ago, brought increased seasonality and widespread grassland expansion, the dense forests that the Eurasian apes relied on began to contract. Most of the European and Asian ape lineages ultimately went extinct in the face of this climatic squeeze, leaving only the ancestors of the orangutans in Asia and the ancestors of the gorillas and chimpanzees confined to the shrinking forests of Africa. The hominin divide. This environmental pressure in Africa, particularly in the Rift Valley region where forests fractured into patchy woodlands, is believed to have been the catalyst for the single most important divergence in this lineage, the split between the ancestors of chimpanzees and the ancestors of humans, hominins. Molecular clock and fossil evidence suggest this final, defining split occurred toward the end of the Miocene, between roughly 9 and 6 million years ago. The Miocene thus reveals a paradoxical truth. The apes were once a globally diverse, dominant group, but it was the contraction of the Miocene hothouse that eliminated most lineages, leaving only a few survivors, one of which, forced by changing vegetation and the need to cross open ground, would eventually develop the capacity for sustained bipedalism, setting our own story in motion. In the late Miocene, approximately 5.97 million years ago, a geological cataclysm unfolded around the Mediterranean basin, resulting in one of the most dramatic and rapid environmental transformations in the Cenozoic, the Messinian Salinity Crisis, MSC. For a brief, terrifying geological span, the Mediterranean Sea, the cradle of so many later civilizations, virtually ceased to exist. The fundamental cause of the MSC was a shift in tectonic plate activity. The African plate, which was slowly converging with the Eurasian plate, caused intense uplift and deformation in the region of the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow natural gateway that connects the Mediterranean Sea to the vast Atlantic Ocean. Evaporation exceeds inflow. Unlike the Atlantic, the Mediterranean is an evaporative basin. It loses more water through surface evaporation than it gains from rivers and rainfall combined. Today, the Atlantic inflow maintains its level. When the rising land in the Gibraltar region constricted and ultimately closed this vital connection, the net evaporative loss set in. Rapid desiccation. Without the constant replenishment of Atlantic water, the immense body of the Mediterranean began to dry up at an astonishing rate. Over a period of tens of thousands of years and culminating in a final rapid drawdown, perhaps in less than 10,000 years, the Mediterranean lost up to 70% of its water volume. The sea level plummeted by hundreds or even thousands of meters. The deep basins were transformed into a gigantic
Low-lying desert, the largest and deepest salt flat in Earth's recent history. The empty basin was a surreal landscape of extremes,
evidenced by the staggering geological formations left behind. The salt giant. The evaporation led to the precipitation of colossal amounts of salt. Beneath the floor of the modern sea lies a layer of evaporated salts, evaporites, that is, in some places up to 3 kilometers, almost 2 miles thick, a testament to the amount of salt extracted from the ancient sea and the volume of water lost. Grand canyons. As the sea level dropped, rivers that once flowed gently into the Mediterranean were suddenly forced to plummet thousands of feet to reach the new, dry basin floor. They carved enormous deep canyons, some rivaling the scale of the Grand Canyon, into the continental shelf. These fossilized river gorges offer some of the most compelling evidence of the extent of the sea level drop. Brackish lakes. The desiccated basin was not entirely lifeless. It contained a few scattered hypersaline lakes, similar to the modern Dead Sea, which slowly became diluted by incoming river water, creating a vast, brackish, and fluctuating inland sea known as the Lago Mar event during the crisis's final stages. The crisis ended as suddenly as it began. Approximately 5.33 million years ago, the tectonic forces and continued erosion finally broke the natural dam at Gibraltar. This initiated the Zanclean Flood, one of the most cataclysmic hydrological events in geological history. The waterfall. Water from the Atlantic Ocean breached the sill at Gibraltar.
As the breach widened, the resulting inflow was unimaginable.
Models suggest that at its peak, the flood delivered water into the dry basin at discharge rates up to 1,000 times greater than the modern Amazon River. The abrupt restoration. This colossal waterfall, which descended thousands of feet into the basin, refilled the Mediterranean Sea with 90% of its current water volume in a period estimated to be as short as a few months to 2 years. The deep basin, which had been a dry salt desert, was violently and rapidly restored to a sea. The Messinian salinity crisis and the subsequent Zanclean flood provide a vivid lesson in the power of plate tectonics to override climate, completely restructuring the life and landscape of an entire region in a geological blink of an eye. This event had implications for faunal interchange across the temporary land bridges and marked the beginning of the Pliocene epoch, the subsequent chapter in the Cenozoic saga. Throughout much of the Cenozoic era, while the great continents of the North America, Europe, and Asia were continually connected by land bridges, allowing faunas to mix and compete, South America existed as a vast island continent. This extraordinary period of splendid isolation, lasting for over 30 million years, created one of the most unique and evolutionarily fascinating mammalian communities in Earth's history, the South American endemics, separated from the rest of the world by ocean troughs after its final. Split from Antarctica around 34 million years ago, South America became a massive natural laboratory. Without the constant pressure and invasion of foreign competitors, particularly the placental predators and grazers evolving in the north, the initial, limited founder groups of mammals were free to evolve into bizarre and novel forms, filling every available ecological niche. The dominant players in this South American world belonged to ancient, endemic lineages Xenarthrans, the strange, jointed ones. This group, whose living relatives include modern armadillos, anteaters, and tree sloths, was the great success story of South America. They diversified into incredible, now extinct forms. Giant ground sloths, Megatherium. These creatures grew to be the size of an elephant, standing up to 6 meters, 20 feet tall when rearing up on their hind legs. They were massive herbivores with huge claws, adapted to browsing high foliage and defending themselves against predators. Glyptodonts. Glyptodon. Resembling massive, armored armadillos, these creatures evolved carapaces, shells, of bone that were often the size and shape of a small car. They were slow-moving grazers, using their body armor as an impenetrable defense against any predator the continent could produce. South American native ungulates, sanus. These are perhaps the most puzzling animals of the Cenozoic. Descended from ancient, primitive hoofed ancestors, they evolved into forms that mimicked the appearance and ecology of ungulates from other continents, a spectacular example of convergent evolution. These extinct orders include notungulates, a huge and diverse group, producing forms that resembled everything from rabbits and rodents to heavy rhinoceroses. Litopterns. This group produced some remarkably horse-like forms, such as Thoatherium, which evolved a single toe on its foot, mirroring the evolution of the North American horse lineage, even though they were only distantly related. This lost world reached its zenith during the Oligocene and Miocene epochs. This was a time when the native predators, marsupial carnivores known as sparassodonts, which converged on dog and cat body plans, ruled the food chain, preying upon the bizarre, armored and giant herbivores. The fate of this unique fauna was sealed by the very geological forces of the Cenozoic that would eventually link North and South America with the completion of the Isthmus of Panama, setting the stage for the chaotic Great American Biotic Interchange and a dramatic collision between two distinct worlds. The isolation that had guaranteed their survival would ultimately make them vulnerable to the waves of immigrants to come. For tens of millions of years, North and South America were separated by the Central American Seaway, a channel that allowed the waters of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans to mingle freely. The final definitive closure of this seaway by the formation of the Isthmus of Panama was a monumental event in the Pliocene epoch, dramatically rerouting global currents, influencing world climate, and, most visibly, uniting two distinct evolutionary realms. The formation of this narrow land bridge, the Isthmus Bridge, was not a singular, sudden event, but the tortured, prolonged result of plate tectonics. The Pacific tectonic plate was slowly subducting beneath the Caribbean and South American plates, a process that generated intense heat and pressure, leading to extensive volcanic activity. Volcanic islands, the initial phase, starting as early as 15 million years ago, saw the formation of a volcanic archipelago, a string of islands in the gap between the continents. This proto-land bridge allowed for early, limited faunal migration via island hopping, final uplift. The process culminated between 4 and 2.7 million years ago. During the late Pliocene, when volcanic activity and the continuous tectonic collision finally pushed the seafloor up entirely, connecting the two continents with a continuous strip of dry land. This was the moment the Isthmus of Panama was fully formed. The geological closure of the isthmus triggered one of the most celebrated natural experiments in biogeography, the Great American Biotic Interchange, GABI. Two faunas which had evolved in complete isolation for the entire Cenozoic were suddenly brought into direct, intense competition. Northward migrants, the South American heralds, South American species, the xenarthrans and caviomorph rodents, like capybaras and porcupines, used the bridge to invade North America. These emigrants included the ancestors of the opossums, armadillos, and giant ground sloths that would later roam as far north as Alaska during the Ice Ages. Southward invaders, the Nearctic onslaught. North American species poured south, including modern groups like camels, the ancestors of llamas and alpacas, deer, bears, raccoons, and, most significantly, highly efficient carnivorans, cats, dogs, and weasels, including the infamous saber-toothed cats. While the exchange was initially reciprocal, The long-term impact on the South American fauna was devastating. The Gabi proved to be profoundly asymmetrical. Northern success. The North American invaders were highly successful, diversifying rapidly and spreading deep into South America. It is estimated that up to half of South America's current mammal fauna descends from these northern immigrants. Southern extinction. In contrast, a large portion of the endemic South American ungulates, sanus, which had evolved without the intense selective pressure of North American predators and grazers, were driven to extinction. Their unique evolutionary solutions were simply unable to compete with the faster, more adaptable northern invaders. The Isthmus of Panama was more than just a bridge for life. It was a crucial catalyst for global climate. By shutting down the Central American Seaway, it forced the North Atlantic currents to reroute. This rerouting intensified the Gulf Stream, carrying warmer, saltier water farther north, which in turn provided the moisture needed to fuel the massive snowfall that contributed to the growth of the Northern Hemisphere ice sheets, a process that would define the upcoming Quaternary period. The emergence of the Isthmus of Panama was truly a continental keystone, linking the biology of the Americas and contributing to the Ice Age that was already beginning to form. In the context of the vast Cenozoic era, the most pivotal evolutionary event for our own species was the divergence of the hominin lineage from other apes, a separation that occurred between 9 and 6 million years ago. This monumental event was not marked by a sudden burst of brain power, but by a simple, radical change in locomotion, the development of habitual bipedalism, walking upright on 2 legs. This is the hallmark of the genus Australopithecus. This evolutionary shift was largely driven by the changing climate and tectonic landscape of East Africa during the late Miocene and Pliocene epochs, starting around 6 million years ago. The fragmenting forest. The long-term global cooling and aridification of the Cenozoic intensified, causing the dense, continuous forests of Africa to recede and fragment. They were replaced by a mosaic of environments, patches of woodland separated by expanding stretches of open savanna and grassland. New selective pressures, hominids, or human ancestors, were forced to spend more time traversing open, exposed ground between dwindling forest patches. This new environment presented significant selective pressures that favored an upright posture. Energy efficiency. Bipedalism is a more energetically efficient way to travel long distances on the ground than the knuckle walking or stooped gait of a chimpanzee, especially when gathering widely dispersed food. Thermoregulation. Standing upright exposes less body surface area to the direct overhead sun, while maximizing the surface area exposed to cooling breezes, aiding in heat dissipation in the hot savanna. Freed hands. Walking on 2 legs freed the hands to carry food, tools, and infants, a crucial adaptation for exploiting resources away from the safety of the trees. The genus Australopithecus, meaning southern ape, which flourished between 4.2 and 1.8 million years ago, represents the embodiment of this transition. Its members, such as Australopithecus afarensis, made famous by the skeleton Lucy, showed a fascinating compromise between a climbing past and an upright future. Lower body commitment. The pelvis and lower limbs were profoundly remodeled. The pelvis became shorter and broader, and the femur, thigh bone, angled inward toward the knee, creating the valgus angle that placed the feet directly beneath the center of gravity. These changes are essential for efficient, stable bipedal walking, allowing the body to balance on one leg while the other swings forward. The footprints of time. The most compelling evidence of this leap comes not from bones, but from the Litoli footprints in Tanzania. Preserved in volcanic ash from 3.66 million years ago, these tracks show a clear, human-like gait, a distinct heel strike followed by a toe-off, Crucially, they show a non-divergent big toe, confirming that the foot was already functioning as a rigid, non-grasping lever, fully committed to upright terrestrial locomotion. Upper body retention. Despite their commitment to walking, Australopithecus retained long arms and curved fingers, features that suggest they still spent significant time climbing trees for shelter or food. Their brains, however, remained small, only slightly larger than those of modern chimpanzees. The bipedal leap was the fundamental step that initiated the human journey. It was the moment that set our lineage apart from the rest of the ape family, defining the hominids and creating the basic anatomical framework upon which all subsequent human evolution, including the later, much larger brains, would be built. Ocean currents are the planet's vast, serpentine circulatory system transporting heat and salt across the globe. Throughout the Cenozoic era, tectonic plate movements continually opened and closed key oceanic gateways, creating profound and irreversible impacts on global climate that accelerated the long-term cooling trend. This is the story of how two seemingly small geographic changes, the opening of the Drake Passage and the closing of the Central American Seaway, acted as the planet's global thermostats, ushering in the modern icehouse world. The first major gate to open was the Drake Passage, the deep channel between South America and the Antarctic Peninsula, which occurred near the Eocene-Oligocene boundary around 34 million years ago. The Circum-Antarctic Current, ACC. When this gateway deepened sufficiently, the powerful Antarctic Circumpolar Current, ACC, was established. This current remains the world's strongest, flowing unimpeded around the entire Antarctic continent. Antarctica's deep freeze. The ACC acted as a thermal barrier, a permanent cold water moat that thermally isolated Antarctica. It blocked warm, subtropical surface waters from reaching the continent. Without this heat, the once forested Antarctica rapidly cooled, leading to the permanent formation of the East Antarctic ice sheet. Global cooling effect. This massive ice sheet had a profound albedo effect, reflecting solar radiation back into space and contributing significantly to the overall global cooling and the transition from the warm Eocene greenhouse to the modern icehouse state. The opening of this southern gateway was the decisive event that created the bipolar, glaciated world we know today. The second major tectonic shift occurred millions of years later with the final uplift and closure of the Central American Seaway, the formation of the Isthmus of Panama, finalized around 4 to 2.7 million years ago. This closure had the opposite, yet equally profound, effect on the Northern Hemisphere. The Caribbean consequence. Before the isthmus, the Caribbean Sea was a mixing zone where fresh, cool, and nutrient-rich Pacific water flowed freely into the Atlantic. When the isthmus closed, this Pacific inflow was cut off. The Caribbean became warmer and significantly saltier as evaporation exceeded local inflow. Intensification of the Gulf Stream. This warm, salty water was forced northward by the prevailing winds, dramatically intensifying the Gulf Stream and its extension, the North Atlantic Current. This current acts as a giant conveyor belt, transferring immense amounts of heat and moisture from the tropics toward the high northern latitudes, Greenland and northwestern Europe, fueling the Ice Age. Paradoxically, this warming of the North Atlantic contributed to the onset of Northern Hemisphere glaciation, NHG. The increased heat and salinity strengthened the entire Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, AMOC, and caused greater evaporation at high latitudes. This moist, warm air then traveled over the cold land masses, causing heavy precipitation, which fell as snow. This increased snowfall and moisture supply accelerated the growth of the Northern Hemisphere ice sheets, effectively fueling the massive glacial cycles that would define the upcoming Pleistocene epoch. Thus, The Cenozoic cooling trend was not a straight line, but a series of tectonic events that dramatically reorganized the planet's ocean circulation, acting as powerful global climate switches that dictated the thermal isolation of the South Pole and the intensification of the North Pole's capacity to build ice. While the global climate was being steadily cooled by ocean currents and the growth of ice sheets, the continents themselves were being aggressively reshaped by internal forces, massive tectonic collisions, and colossal volcanic outbursts. During the Miocene epoch, 23 to 5.3 million years ago, this internal activity produced vast geological features and injected enough material into the atmosphere to temporarily disrupt the global climate. The most spectacular form of neogene volcanism was the eruption of continental flood basalts, immense outpourings of low-viscosity lava from long fissures, not single volcanic cones. These events covered vast continental areas, burying the older landscape under thousands of feet of rock and profoundly altering drainage patterns. The Columbia River basalts, CRB. The youngest and best preserved flood basalt province is the Columbia River basalt group in the Pacific Northwest of North America, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Starting around 17 million years ago, lava flowed in pulses for millions of years, covering an area of over 210,000 square kilometers. The plateau maker. These multiple layers of dark, dense basalt created the enormous flat expanse known as the Columbia River Plateau, or Columbia Basin. The sheer weight of this lava caused the Earth's crust to subside, forming a basin that remains today. Ecological impact. The lava flows repeatedly dammed and diverted the ancient Columbia River, creating temporary lakes. These lakes, like the richly fossiliferous Clarkia Lake, became prime locations for preserving the plants and animals that thrived between the eruptions, offering scientists a detailed snapshot of Miocene life. The release
of gas and aerosols from these immense volcanic
events often correlated precisely with dramatic shifts in the Cenozoic climate. Record the mid-Miocene climatic optimum, MMCO, the most vigorous phase of the Columbia River basalt eruption, where over 95% of the lava was emitted in a relatively short period, around 17 to 15 million years ago, occurred nearly contemporaneously with the MMCO, a significant global warming event. Greenhouse gas link. While individual explosive volcanoes primarily release sulfur dioxide, causing short-term cooling, these vast flood basalt events, erupting over long periods, can release massive amounts of carbon dioxide, CO2, and other greenhouse gases. Many researchers suggest this colossal CO2 pulse from the CRB and other volcanic activity was the primary driver of the MMCO, which briefly reversed the long-term cooling trend and pushed global temperatures higher than the preceding Oligocene. The Ethiopian traps, similar large-scale volcanism, was active elsewhere. The Ethiopian traps, or flood basalts, in the Oligo-Miocene transition also covered vast regions of East Africa, contributing to the uplift and tectonic forces that would eventually lead to the formation of the East African Rift System, the very landscape in which hominids began their evolutionary journey toward bipedalism. The Neogene therefore serves as a powerful reminder of the intricate relationship between the deep Earth and its surface life. These eruptions were not merely destructive, they were continent-building events that injected the volatile elements necessary to drive both short-term, dramatic temperature spikes and the long-term environmental changes that shaped mammalian destiny. The Neogene period, characterized by overall cooling, held one final, fascinating anomaly before the planetary climate shifted into the deep freeze of the Quaternary Ice Ages. This was the mid-Pliocene warm period, MPWP, a sustained interval of warmth that offers a startling glimpse into a possible future world. The MPWP, lasting roughly from 3.3 to 3.0 million years ago, was the most recent time in Earth's history when global temperatures were significantly and consistently warmer than they are today. Elevated temperatures. Mean global temperatures during the MPWP were estimated to be 2°C to 3°C higher than pre-industrial levels. The polar amplification. This warmth was not distributed evenly, it was subject to polar amplification. Temperatures at the high latitudes of the Arctic and Antarctic were disproportionately warmer, sometimes by as much as 10°C to 20°C during winter. The CO2 connection. Crucially, proxy data suggests that atmospheric CO2 concentrations during the MPWP were similar to, or slightly higher than, today's levels, estimated between 360 to 450 parts per million. This similarity makes the MPWP one of the most critical ancient analogues for understanding the long-term effects of current, human-driven climate change. The consequences of this warm period were dramatic, altering life and geography worldwide. Northern forests. The significant warming at high latitudes meant that the Arctic region was a completely different world. The tree line shifted dramatically northward, allowing temperate forests and woodlands to thrive in regions now dominated by tundra and ice, such as the high Arctic of Canada and Greenland. Fossil evidence from Ellesmere Island, for instance, records the presence of forests and large browsing mammals, such as extinct relatives of the camel. Reduced ice and high seas, the warmth limited the extent of permanent ice sheets in the northern hemisphere, and the southern Antarctic ice sheet was smaller and more dynamic than it is today. Consequently, global sea levels during the MPWP are estimated to have been significantly higher, at least 15 to 25 meters higher than present levels. However, the Pliocene warm period was merely a prelude to a far colder era. The ultimate direction of the Cenozoic climate trend, the icehouse world, was cemented by two major events in the later Pliocene. The M2 glaciation event, this brief, sharp, cold stage, marine isotope stage M2, occurring around 3.3 million years ago, temporarily interrupted the Pliocene warmth. While short-lived, it was the most pronounced glacial stage of the Pliocene, representing a major push toward ice sheet growth and deep ocean cooling. The intensification of northern glaciation, the final, irreversible tipping point, occurred around 2.7 million years ago. Tectonic and orbital factors, enhanced by the recent closure of the Isthmus of Panama, Chapter 16, and the resulting intensification of the Gulf Stream's moisture transport to the north, finally triggered the full-scale rhythmic growth of massive continental ice sheets across North America and Eurasia. This dramatic step change in climate marks the close of the Pliocene epoch and the irrevocable onset of the Quaternary ice ages. The brief warmth of the MPWP gave way to a new world defined by deep, cyclical cold, ushering in the epoch that would challenge the survival of the largest mammals and ultimately shape the rapid evolution of the genus Homo. The Pleistocene epoch, which began 258 million years ago, marks the definitive start of the era commonly called the Ice Age. It was a geological epoch defined not by a stable climate, but by relentless, intense, and rhythmic climatic volatility that acted as a crucible for life, fundamentally shaping the fate of the megafauna and the rise of humanity. The relentless oscillations of the Pleistocene were not random. They were primarily driven by small, predictable variations in Earth's orbit and axial tilt, collectively known as the Milankovitch cycles, the orbital dance. These cycles affect the distribution and amount of solar insolation, sunlight, reaching the northern hemisphere during critical summer months, the time when ice sheets either melt or continue to grow. There are three primary cycles: eccentricity, the shape of Earth's orbit, a 100,000-year cycle; obliquity, the tilt of Earth's axis, a 41,000-year cycle; precession, the wobble of Earth's axis, a 23,000-year cycle; the glacial rhythm. When these cycles align to produce cooler,
less intense northern hemisphere summers, winter snow accumulated faster than it melted, and the continental ice sheets expanded. This cold period is known as a glacial. When orbital patterns produced warmer summers, the glaciers retreated, marking a brief interglacial period, like the one we live in now. Over the span of the Pleistocene, there have been at least 50 such cycles. The immense scale of the Pleistocene glaciations had physical and biological effects that cascaded across the globe. Sea level collapse. During peak glaciation, continental ice sheets, up to 3 kilometers, 10,000 feet thick, locked up vast quantities of water. This transfer of water from the ocean to the land caused global sea levels to plummet by as much as 120 to 130 meters, 400 feet. Continental exposure. This dramatic sea level drop exposed huge expanses of the continental shelves as dry land. The most famous example is the Bering Land Bridge, Beringia, a wide corridor connecting Siberia and Alaska, which became the pathway for the migration of mammals and eventually the first humans into the Americas. Climate zones. The massive ice sheets dramatically altered atmospheric circulation. The high reflectivity of the ice, albedo effect, further amplified the cooling, pushing temperate and boreal vegetation zones far southward. The unglaciated regions of North America and Eurasia became vast. Cold and arid periglacial steppes, a dusty, dry world that demanded extreme specialization from the plant and animal life surviving there. The initial 2 million years of the Pleistocene were dominated by the shorter, lower amplitude 41,000-year cycles paced by obliquity. However, around 1.25 to 0.7 million years ago, the climate system underwent a profound shift known as the mid-Pleistocene. Transition, MPT. The rhythm of the Ice Age changed. The cycles became longer, averaging around
100,000 years and far more.
intense and asymmetrical. Long, gradual periods of cooling were followed by rapid, abrupt warmings. This intensification is thought to be linked to a gradual lowering of background atmospheric CO2 levels and the removal of soft sediment from the northern hemisphere crust, allowing the ice sheets to grow far thicker, more stable, and more resistant to orbital thawing. The relentless pressure of these fluctuating glacial cycles determined which creatures survived. Only those adaptable enough to thrive in both the cold, arid glacial periods and the brief, warm interglacials could persist, setting the stage for the magnificent megafauna that would soon define the Pleistocene world. The core of the Pleistocene experience was the mammoth steppe, a unique, immensely productive biome that existed during the cold glacial periods, stretching across northern Eurasia and Beringia, the exposed Bering Land Bridge, into northwestern North America. This was not the barren, snow-covered tundra we know today, but a cold, arid grassland that sustained the Cenozoic's most spectacular assembly of cold, adapted megafauna. The mammoth steppe was a world forged by dry, cold conditions, a cryo-arid climate that created a highly efficient grazing ecosystem. Low precipitation. The climate was so cold that little moisture was held in the air, resulting in low snowfall. This was crucial,
as it meant grazing animals could easily access the vegetation. Unlike in wet,
snowy climates where food becomes locked under deep drifts or turns into peat. High fertility. The dry conditions and strong winds prevented the formation of bogs and thick moss mats, which degrade soil quality. Instead, the mammoth steppe had fertile, well-drained soils that supported a high density of grasses, sedges and forbs, flowering, non-woody plants. This allowed for a massive overall biomass far exceeding that of modern tundra. The productivity paradox. This thriving herbivore community in a cold climate created a productivity paradox for early scientists. The solution lies in the plants themselves. the short growing season was intensely active, and the sheer volume and nutritional quality of the specialized steppe vegetation provided enough energy for gigantic herds. This environment selected for large-bodied, highly specialized grazers capable of surviving extended periods of cold and subsisting on coarse, dry forage. Mammuthus primigenius, the woolly mammoth, the iconic symbol of the Ice Age, was perhaps the most perfectly cold-adapted animal to ever exist. Insulation. The mammoth possessed an incredibly thick coat of long, shaggy hair, up to a meter long, with a dense undercoat, as well as a significant layer of subcutaneous fat and a distinctive fatty hump on its back for energy storage during the lean winters. Feeding machine. Its skull featured a specialized, high-domed structure and short ears to minimize heat loss. Its molars were extremely high-crowned, with numerous thin enamel plates forming a continuous, rough-grinding surface perfectly suited for endlessly processing the tough, siliceous grasses and forbs of the steppe. The long, curved tusks were likely used to clear snow and scrape away vegetation. Chelodonta antiquitatis, the woolly rhinoceros. Another essential grazer of the steppe, the woolly rhino was comparable in size to the modern white rhino. The snowplow, like the mammoth, it was protected by thick, shaggy fur and a fat reserve hump. Its most specialized feature was its massive nasal horn, which was often flattened and showed abrasion marks. This suggests the horn was used like a snowplow, sweeping aside snow to reach the frozen vegetation beneath. Cranial reinforcement. Its nasal septum was often ossified, turned to bone, an adaptation that reinforced the skull against the immense pressure of pushing its horn through packed snow and ice. Megaloxeros giganteus, the Irish elk. This immense deer species, though not exclusively restricted to the steppe, was characterized by its gigantic antlers, which could span up to 3.6 meters, 12 feet. Sexual selection. While debate once suggested the antlers caused its extinction, they were actually proportional to its huge body size, likely driven by extreme sexual selection in the open environment where males would display and fight. Its preferred habitat was open parkland and scrub, relying on highly nutritious forage to annually regrow its colossal rack. The mammoth fauna experienced cycles of boom and bust, surviving because their vast, interconnected range allowed them to migrate hundreds of miles in search of favorable grazing patches as climate shifted rapidly. They were the dominant ecological engineers of the Pleistocene, maintaining the open steppe and enabling the survival of numerous other species, including the first human hunters. The Pleistocene Ice Age was a world of mega herbivores, and to balance that abundance, it required a perfected killing machine. That role was filled by Smilodon, the iconic saber-toothed cat, which reigned as the dominant super predator across the Americas. Smilodon was not related to modern tigers, but belonged to the extinct subfamily Machairodontinae. While the genus had 3 species, the largest and most terrifying was Smilodon populator, which prowled South America and was among the largest cats ever to live. Immense, bulk, S. populator was built for power, not pursuit. It stood about 1.2 meters, 4 feet tall at the shoulder, and could weigh up to 400 kilograms, 880 pounds, significantly heavier and more muscular than a modern African lion. Its immense forelimbs were disproportionately powerful, designed not for running but for grappling and restraining gigantic, struggling prey. The signature weapon, the defining feature, was the pair of fearsome, laterally compressed saber teeth in the upper jaw, which could reach up to 28 centimeters, 11 inches, in length in S. populator. These slender, blade-like canines, coupled with a jaw that could open to a wide 120-degree angle, were highly specialized instruments of death. The delicate nature of the long sabers meant that Smilodon could not hunt by crushing bone or engaging in a chaotic, sustained struggle like modern cats. Its killing method was a precise, specialized sequence, ambush and grapple. Smilodon was an ambush predator using its short, stocky build to hide in dense cover, despite popular imagery placing it on the open steppe. Fossil evidence suggests the largest species preferred the mosaic of open woodlands and thickets common in the Pleistocene. The cat would spring onto a large prey animal like a camel, bison, or giant ground sloth. Restraint, using its tremendously powerful forelimbs and claws, Smilodon would wrestle the massive animal to the ground, pinning it until it was completely subdued and unable to struggle. Its short, bobbed tail offered little aid in balance, confirming this reliance on close quarters, grappling, rather than high-speed chase. The killing bite. Only when the prey was immobilized would the cat deliver the fatal blow. Smilodon would anchor its lower jaw and use its powerful neck muscles, supported by a modified skull and vertebrae, to drive the upper sabers into the prey's soft throat or neck. This precise stab-and-slice attack was designed to sever the major arteries and windpipe, inducing rapid blood loss and quick expiration with minimal risk to the fragile canines from lateral stresses. Fossil evidence, particularly from the Rancho La Brea tar pits in North America, provides compelling, indirect evidence that Smilodon may have been a social predator. Survival of the injured. Many Smilodon skeletons show severe injuries, including broken limbs and cracked sabers, that would have made solitary hunting impossible for months, yet the cats survived and healed. This suggests they likely lived in prides or groups that shared large kills, a strategy necessary to sustain their immense caloric needs in a highly competitive ice age environment that also included fearsome predators like the dire wolf. And the American lion. Smilodon reigned as the most fearsome specialized predator of the late Cenozoic, perfectly adapted to dispatching the slow, bulky megafauna of the Americas. Its hyper-specialization, however, was a double-edged sword. When its preferred large prey disappeared at the end of the Pleistocene, Smilodon lacked the dietary flexibility of smaller, less specialized cats, contributing to its eventual extinction. The transition from the genus Australopithecus to the genus Homo was marked by a fundamental change in survival strategy. It was a shift from relying primarily on anatomical strength for chewing tough plant material to relying on technology and behavior to control the environment. This defining leap in the Pleistocene gave rise to the first toolmakers, Homo habilis and Homo erectus. Emerging around 2.4 million years ago in eastern southern Africa, Homo habilis, or the handyman, represents the earliest member of our own genus and the first hominin clearly associated with stone tool manufacture. Anatomical shift. Compared to their Australopithecus ancestors, H. habilis showed a slight but significant increase in brain size, averaging around 650 cubic centimeters, a reduction in the size of the face and teeth, and a more rounded cranium. This suggested a dietary shift away from the heavy chewing required for fibrous plants. Oldowan tools. The technological breakthrough was the Oldowan Industrial Complex, Mode 1 technology. Dated back to about 2.6 million years ago, these were crude, simple tools consisting of stone cores from which a few flakes were struck off, creating a sharp, single cutting edge. These basic choppers and flakes were essential for butchering animal carcasses, a technique that became crucial in a landscape dominated by fast, large predators. The scavenger's niche. Evidence suggests that H. habilis was primarily a scavenger, using these sharp stone flakes to quickly slice meat from a carcass left by a lion or saber-toothed cat before larger, more powerful scavengers arrived. They also used the stone cores to smash open long bones to access the nutritious marrow, a calorie-dense resource previously inaccessible. This increase in protein and calorie intake fueled further brain development. The subsequent emergence of Homo erectus, starting around 1.9 million years ago, represented the first truly modern human body plan and a massive leap in behavioral complexity. A modern body. H. erectus evolved a body far more like our own. They were taller, with longer legs and shorter arms, perfectly adapted for long-distance walking and running. Their brain size was considerably larger, up to 1/100 cc. Acheulean technology. H. erectus pioneered the Acheulean industrial complex, Mode 2 technology, starting around 1.6 million years ago. This technology was defined by the sophisticated, symmetrical, teardrop-shaped hand axe. These tools, crafted through bifacial working, flaking on two sides, required far greater cognitive planning, fine motor control, and abstract thought than the simpler, older one tools. The hand axe was a multi-purpose tool used for hunting, butchering, skinning, and digging. Organized hunting. With improved tools and greater cooperative skills, H. erectus transitioned from primary scavenging to organized hunting. Fossil sites contain evidence of these groups successfully taking down large prey animals. Hunting meat provided the high-quality protein necessary to support their rapidly growing brains. The mastery of fire. Perhaps the most pivotal achievement was the eventual mastery of controlled fire. While the precise timing is debated, evidence of deliberate fire use, hearths and heat-treated earth, dates back almost 800,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. Fire provided critical advantages: warmth, essential for survival as H. erectus migrated out of Africa into the colder regions of Eurasia. Protection. Fire kept large predators away from campsites at night. Cooking food, especially meat and tubers, made it easier to chew and digest, extracting more calories and further reducing the evolutionary pressure for large, powerful jaws. Homo erectus was the first hominin to use these cultural tools to break free of Africa, migrating across Asia and into Europe, demonstrating an unparalleled ability to adapt and exert control over the hostile and dynamic environment of the Ice Age. The massive cyclical glaciations of the Pleistocene epoch served as a powerful engineer of global geography, not through the creation of new land, but through the sequestration of water. By locking vast quantities of water into continental ice sheets, the glaciers effectively drained the oceans, exposing the shallow seabed and creating crucial terrestrial connections known as continental land bridges. These ephemeral corridors facilitated the greatest faunal migrations of the late Cenozoic during peak glacial periods, such as the last glacial maximum around 26,500 to 19,000 years ago. Global sea levels dropped by as much as 130 meters, 425 feet below present levels. This exposed the continental shelves, the submerged edges of the continents, turning them into vast, often fertile plains. These exposed regions were not merely narrow causeways, but immense territories that allowed for the widespread intercontinental exchange of plants and animals. Two key land bridges played instrumental roles in shaping the biodiversity of the modern world. The connection. The Bering Land Bridge formed repeatedly during the Pleistocene across the Bering Strait, connecting Siberia, Asia, and Alaska, North America. This bridge, known as Beringia, was not a narrow strip, but an immense, treeless grassy plain that at its greatest extent was up to 1,000 kilometers wide. The highway for life, Beringia served as the primary thoroughfare for the dispersal of mammoth steppe fauna. The woolly mammoth, steppe bison, caribou, brown bear, and the lion ancestor of the American lion all traveled eastward into the New World. Conversely, species like the horse, which evolved in North America, crossed westward into Asia, the human gateway. Most critically, Beringia was the pathway for the Paleo-Indians, the first waves of modern humans who migrated from Asia to colonize the Americas. The timing of this human migration is debated, but it was entirely dependent on the existence and accessibility of this vast land bridge, which was finally submerged by rising sea levels around 11,000 years ago. Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, the lowered sea levels exposed the Sunda Shelf, linking the modern islands of Sumatra, Borneo and Java to the Asian mainland, allowing mainland fauna to spread throughout the region. The Australian Bridge. To the southeast, a separate bridge, often called the Sahul Shelf, linked New Guinea and Australia, facilitating the movement of the unique Australian megafauna. The constant opening and closing of these bridges, dictated by the rhythmic expansion and retreat of the ice sheets, had several lasting biogeographical effects: faunal exchange and homogenization. In the Northern Hemisphere, these connections promoted the exchange of species between continents, leading to the homogenization of Eurasian and North American faunas, as seen in the gabi between North and South America in Chapter 16. Refugia and isolation. Conversely, during the warmer interglacials, the sea levels rose, submerging the bridges and isolating populations. These isolation periods, called refugia, often led to the splitting and diversification of species, adapting to the confined island conditions. The continental land bridges were the fluctuating portals of the Ice Age, directly connecting distant land masses and ensuring that life's adaptations, from the long coat of the mammoth to the bipedal stance of the human hunter, could be tested and distributed on a truly global scale. Their ephemeral nature was the engine of much of the late Cenozoic's evolutionary drama. In the cold heart of Ice Age Europe, the survival of both predator and large herbivore was critically tied to the massive, labyrinthine cave systems that honeycombed the continent. These caves provided the one resource that the open mammoth steppe could not: secure, warm shelter. This necessity created a fierce and intimate ecological competition between two of Europe's largest, most specialized megafauna, the cave bear and the cave lion. The cave bear, Ursus spelaeus, was an extinct cousin of the modern brown bear, yet its ecology was strikingly different and highly specialized for the Ice Age. Size and morphology. The cave bear was huge, with some males reaching weights comparable to a modern polar or Kodiak bear, up to 1,000 kilograms, over 2,200 pounds. It was distinguished by its massive, broad skull and steeply arched forehead. Dietary specialization. Despite being a member of the carnivora order, stable isotope analysis of their bones consistently shows that cave bears were overwhelmingly herbivorous. Their large, complex molars were adapted for grinding large quantities of tough, abrasive plant matter, grasses, forbs, and underground storage organs, rather than slicing meat. This extreme dietary specialization meant their survival was entirely dependent on the productivity of the brief, intense summer growing season. The cave niche. For 6 months of the year, the cave bear was tied to the caves for hibernation. These secure roosts were essential for females to give birth and nurse their cubs through the cold winter without having to forage. The dens were not used merely as temporary shelter, but as critical breeding and survival zones, explaining why countless fossil remains accumulate in these deep recesses. The cave lion, Panthera spelaea, an extinct species or subspecies of lion, was the largest cat of the Ice Age, ranging from Western Europe across Siberia. Adaptations. Cave lions were larger and more robustly built than modern African lions, and likely possessed thick fur coats, a critical adaptation for surviving the sub-zero temperatures of the steppe. Cave paintings, such as those in Chauvet Cave, often depict them without the prominent mane of their modern African cousins, suggesting possible differences in social structure or a thermal adaptation to the cold. Hunting strategy. Isotope data suggests that the cave lion was a highly successful predator of the open, grazing megafauna specializing in medium to large ungulates like reindeer and extinct horses. While they hunted on the open mammoth steppe, their name comes from the abundance of their remains found inside caves. The intersection of these two species created a deadly conflict over the one irreplaceable resource: the cave. Predation. Risk. The cave lion was known to prey on the vulnerable cave bears, particularly cubs or adults weakened during hibernation. An adult male cave bear was a formidable opponent, and evidence suggests that conflict sometimes resulted in injury or death for the lions. But the fat-rich carcass of a hibernating bear represented a high-reward meal for a cold-adapted predator. Interspecies conflict. More broadly, the presence of cave lions, cave hyenas, and ultimately early humans, all seeking to utilize the cave's intensified competition. These carnivores were competing for the same limited, secure winter space that the herbivorous cave bears needed for survival and reproduction. This fierce competition for real estate, the warm, stable cave environment, was a constant feature of the European Ice Age ecosystem. In the end, the rigid dietary specialization of the cave bear, coupled with the pressure from human competition for both the caves and their shared herbivore prey, contributed to its extinction before the worst of the megafauna collapsed. The struggle for a safe winter den proved just as fierce as the chase on the open plain. The history of the late Pleistocene, starting 125,000 years ago, is not a simple linear march toward Homo sapiens, but a time when the Earth was shared by at least 3 distinct human lineages, all competing and, critically, interbreeding across a dynamic, cold Eurasian landscape. These were our Ice Age cousins, the robust Neanderthals and the enigmatic Denisovans. The Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, primarily inhabited Europe and parts of Western and Central Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, from roughly 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. They were a lineage perfectly adapted to the harsh, glacial climate. Physical adaptation. They possessed a characteristic hyper-Arctic physique, a stocky, muscular body, relatively short limbs, and a broad torso. All features designed to minimize surface area and retain body heat, a silhouette similar to modern Arctic populations. Their massive noses and large sinuses are often cited as an adaptation for humidifying and warming the cold, dry glacial air. Cultural adaptation. Neanderthals were highly skilled close-quarters hunters, relying on powerful wooden spears and the Mysterian stone tool industry, refined flakes struck from prepared cores. Their fossil record suggests a dependence on large game, and archaeological evidence points to a compassionate social structure, with injured individuals surviving severe trauma, implying communal care. The Denisovans, identified primarily through DNA extracted from a finger bone and teeth found in Denisova Cave in Siberia, were the Neanderthals' sister group. Range and adaptability. While fossil evidence is scarce, genetic analysis reveals a massive geographic range, stretching from the cold Altai mountains of Siberia to the warmer, high-altitude plateaus of Tibet, where a jawbone was found, and genetically reaching the islands of Oceania. This suggests the Denisovans, unlike the Neanderthals, may have been better adapted to a wider, more ecologically diverse range of habitats. Physicality. Their few physical remains suggest they shared the robust build of the Neanderthals, but their teeth were remarkably large, a feature closer to much earlier hominids. The period between 60,000, 40,000 years ago was marked by the coexistence of these three groups as Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa and spread across Eurasia. The genetic legacy. Modern genetic studies have confirmed that Neanderthals, Denisovans and Homo sapiens interbred multiple times. Today, most non-African populations carry 1% to 4% Neanderthal DNA, while populations in Southeast Asia and Oceania carry a significant genetic legacy from the Denisovans. These introgressed genes often relate to critical functions like immunity, metabolism, and skin hair color, suggesting they provided a swift adaptive advantage to H. sapiens in the new Eurasian environments. The hybrid individual. The complexity of this mingling is dramatically illustrated by the discovery of a first-generation hybrid nicknamed Denny, found in Denisovan Cave, who had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Despite their resilience and commingling, both Neanderthals and Denisovans disappeared from the fossil record around 40,000 to 30,000 years ago, leaving Homo sapiens as the sole surviving human species. The reasons for this replacement are complex and debated, likely involving a combination of subtle disadvantages. Population dynamics. Neanderthals maintained consistently small, isolated populations, making them genetically vulnerable and less capable of recovering from major environmental shocks. Homo sapiens arrived with larger, more connected groups, technological and social superiority. While Neanderthals were intelligent, H. sapiens exhibited greater technological flexibility, using a wider range of sophisticated tools and ranged weaponry, like throwing spears, and developing larger, more complex social and trade networks that ensured resource stability. Climate stress. Repeated, severe cold snaps and rapid climate shifts likely fragmented the Neanderthals' preferred woodland habitats, while H. sapiens, with their highly generalist diet and superior social organization, were better equipped to adapt to the fluctuating plaid climate of the late Pleistocene. The extinction of our cousins marked the closing of a dramatic chapter in the Cenozoic, securing our species' lone dominance over the planet. Was the cognitive revolution, the moment when Homo sapiens transitioned from merely being anatomically modern to being behaviorally modern. This shift, marked by an explosion of creativity and abstract thought, set our species irrevocably apart. For decades, the traditional view, known as the Upper Paleolithic Revolution model, suggested that complex human thought appeared suddenly in Europe around 40,000 to 50,000 years ago, coinciding with the major migration of H. sapiens out of Africa. However, archaeological evidence, primarily from Africa, has complicated this narrative, suggesting a more gradual accumulation of cognitive traits. Early African evidence, sites in South Africa, such as Blombos Cave, have yielded sophisticated artifacts dating back as far as 70,000 to 100,000 years ago. These include deliberately engraved ochre fragments and pierced shells used for personal ornamentation and jewelry. These items are indisputable evidence of symbolic thinking, the ability to create and share meaning through abstract, arbitrary signs long before H. sapiens reached Europe. The African Middle Stone Age. This suggests that the brain structures required for modern thought were already in place in early Homo sapiens populations in Africa, long before the famous European cave art appeared. Regardless of whether the cognitive change was a genetic switch or a slow cultural build-up, the end result was a radical transformation in human behavior. Complex language. The revolution implies the full development of complex, syntactic language, the capacity to combine symbols, words, in infinite ways to represent reality, communicate detailed plans, and tell stories about fictional scenarios or displaced events, mental time travel. This allows for the storage and transmission of an enormous amount of non-genetic, cultural information. Symbolic art and identity. The flourishing of sophisticated art, often called the creative explosion, is the most visible hallmark. This includes cave paintings, the spectacular, realistic depictions of megafauna like woolly rhinoceroses and lions found in caves like Chauvet and Lascaux in Europe. Sculpture. The carving of small, intricate figurines from ivory or bone, such as the famous Venus figures or the Lion Man sculpture. Personal adornment. The deliberate use of shell beads, pendants, and pigments, ochre, as markers of social identity, status, or group membership. Innovation and foresight. The ability to communicate abstractly allowed for cumulative culture. Technological innovation accelerated, leading to the invention of specialized bone tools, fishing gear, bows and arrows, and tailored clothing, demonstrating an advanced capacity for planning and foresight necessary for surviving the brutal, unpredictable glacial cycles. The precise cause of this revolution remains one of the greatest puzzles in human evolution. Was it driven by a single genetic mutation, perhaps related to the FOXP2 gene linked to speech, that quickly spread through small African populations? Or was it the long-term synergistic relationship, gene-culture co-evolution, between tool use, increased group size, and climate volatility that slowly selected for ever greater cognitive capacity? The outcome is clear. The ability to think symbolically, to share complex knowledge, and to organize into highly cooperative groups gave Homo sapiens an unprecedented adaptive advantage. This cognitive leap, occurring as the Ice Age reached its height, enabled our ancestors to successfully outcompete, replace, or absorb all other hominin species and ultimately colonize every major continent on Earth. The greatest mystery of the late Cenozoic is the rapid, near-simultaneous collapse of the Ice Age megafauna, species over 44 kilograms, across the globe. Around the end of the Pleistocene epoch, approximately 13,000 to 10,000 years ago, majestic animals like the woolly mammoth, Smilodon, saber-toothed cat, and giant ground sloth vanished, leaving behind an impoverished fauna. The cause of this selective, size-biased extinction is one of the most intense and long-running debates in paleontology, centered on two competing, yet potentially overlapping, hypotheses. The extinction event was globally asynchronous, meaning it didn't happen at the same time everywhere, a fact that highlights the difference between the two main drivers. This theory, championed by paleontologist Paul Martin, posits that human hunting was the primary driver of the megafaunal collapse, asynchronous timing. The strongest evidence for this theory lies in the correlation between the extinction timing and the arrival of Homo sapiens on different continents and islands that had long been isolated. Americas. Large-scale extinction began around 13,000 years ago, shortly after the first human colonists, Paleo-Indians, entered North America via the Bering Land Bridge, Australia, Sahul. The extinction of unique megafauna like giant flightless birds and marsupial lions occurred much earlier, around 40,000 to 50,000 years ago, precisely coinciding with the initial human colonization of the continent. Naivete and vulnerability. Megafauna on these long isolated continents, unlike those in Africa and Eurasia which co-evolved with Homo erectus and Neanderthals for millions of years, were ecologically naive. They lacked evolved defenses against a highly efficient, cooperative superpredator like Homo sapiens, leading to rapid population crashes. Size bias. The extinction disproportionately targeted large animals, which are slower to reproduce and recover from population loss, a strong signal of human hunters selectively targeting high-yield prey. This theory argues that the intense, rapid warming and environmental restructuring at the close of the Pleistocene were the ultimate causes of the extinction. Habitat fragmentation. The transition from the cold, dry glacial period to the warm, moist Holocene, our current interglacial, led to the sudden disappearance of the mammoth steppe, the vast, productive grassland that fueled the megafauna ecosystem collapse. As the climate warmed, glaciers retreated and the moist conditions led to the spread of thick moss, scrub and peatland paludification. This vegetation was less nutritious and physically locked up the mineral-rich soils. Animals highly specialized for the steppe, like the woolly mammoth and woolly rhino, saw their required forage and habitat fragment and degrade, leading to widespread starvation and reproductive failure. Vulnerability. This hypothesis argues that while megafauna survived past glacial cycles, the rapid and complex nature of the final transition was uniquely disruptive, pushing specialized populations past their point of no return. Modern consensus increasingly suggests that the extinction was not caused by a single factor, but by a catastrophic interaction between climate stress and human predation, the two-punch model. Climate priming. Climate change caused the primary habitat loss, severely stressing megafauna populations and reducing their numbers, making them highly vulnerable. Human trigger. The arrival of highly adaptable Homo sapiens added an unprecedented, sustained layer of predation pressure and competition. Humans may have finished off already dwindling populations, preventing them from recovering during warm interglacial spells. This anthropogenic pressure was the coup de grace. The loss of these megafauna had immense ecological consequences, known as defaunation. Their removal led to the rapid loss of open habitats, increased frequency of wildfires due to the buildup of uncropped vegetation, and the decline of plant species that relied on megafauna for seed dispersal. The face of the Earth was permanently simplified, leaving a world less ecologically complex than the one our ancestors had known. We conclude our journey not in the distant past of giants, but in the immediacy of the present. The long, turbulent history of the Cenozoic era, defined by continental drift, colossal volcanic eruptions and glacial cycles, led finally to the relatively stable, warm interglacial period known as the Holocene epoch, which began about 11,700 years ago. The stability of the Holocene allowed for the one last, definitive emergence, the rise of human civilization. However, the speed and scale of human influence in the last few centuries have led scientists to argue that the Holocene is over. We have entered a new human-dominated phase that requires its own definition, the Anthropocene, the age of humans. The core argument for the Anthropocene is that Homo sapiens has become the single dominant geological force on the planet, altering Earth systems at a rate unprecedented in recent deep time. Unlike the gradual tectonic and orbital shifts that define the Cenozoic, the markers of the Anthropocene are rapid and visible. Atmospheric chemistry, the combustion of fossil fuels, beginning with the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, has caused global CO2 and methane concentrations to surge far outside the natural fluctuations of the past million years. This is driving rapid global warming, a thermal shift that is historically faster than the natural warming after the ice ages. Mass extinction, human activity through habitat destruction, hunting and climate change is driving a global, accelerated mass extinction event marked by a selective loss of large animals, megafauna, and a dramatic decline in biodiversity that will be visible in the future fossil record. Novel materials in strata. We are creating new geological markers, often called the technofossils of our age. These include plastics. Millions of tons of persistent plastic waste now pervade soils and ocean sediments worldwide. Concrete and aluminum. These industrial materials are being added to the Earth's crust at a scale comparable to some major volcanic events. The bomb spike, the most specific and globally synchronous marker, is the worldwide presence of radionuclide fallout from mid-20th century nuclear weapons testing, a definitive datable layer in global sediments, and ice cores often cited as the beginning of the great acceleration around 1950, while the term Anthropocene is now widely used in ecology and social science. Its official designation as a formal geological epoch succeeding the Holocene remains controversial among stratigraphers. The Golden Spike Challenge: to formally declare a new epoch, geologists require a clear synchronous golden spike, GSSP, a measurable global signal preserved in the rock layers. While the nuclear fallout spike is a strong candidate, the sheer shortness of the human era complicates a definition based on rock stratigraphy. The ethical burden. Regardless of its official status, the concept forces us to recognize that we are no longer just passengers in the Cenozoic narrative. We are its authors and engineers. This raises profound questions for the future of the Cenozoic era. Will human activity drive the planet toward a climate state hotter than the Eocene, permanently eliminating the polar ice established during the Oligocene freeze? Will our technological solutions, our ability to engineer energy sources, manage ecosystems and curb pollution, ultimately succeed in stabilizing the Earth system, thereby creating a long, though managed continuation of the Holocene? The rise of Homo sapiens is the culminating chapter of the Cenozoic. As the dominant planetary force, our choices in the coming centuries will determine the fate of millions of years of evolutionary history, defining the climate, the land, and the life of the Earth for millennia to come. We have traced a path from the ashes of the dinosaurs to the age of self-aware, planet-shaping humanity. We hope this long journey has brought you peace and perspective. If you found this exploration calming or thought-provoking, please support the Tierra Hueca channel by giving this video a like, subscribing, and leaving a comment below to tell us what ancient era you would like to explore next. Sleep well, traveler.